Today is the 55th day of the war. It is 4:30 p.m. here in Israel, 9:30 a.m. in Israel. It is November 30th, 2023, and let's get started with good news. The truce has been extended, which will allow 10 more hostages to be freed and three bodies of three IDF soldiers, which were disgustingly kidnapped by Palestinian terrorists. Hamas will release them, and this also has 24 hours of no more fighting. And then the war will presumably resume in, I guess, sometime over Shabbat. That's when the ceasefire will expire unless a new one is signed, and then the war will once again start. America has been moving soldiers from Iraq to Syria. This is to counter attacks against American soldiers in Syria, which are being conducted by Hezbollah. So having more soldiers closer to Israel, more American soldiers closer to Israel, is a great thing, because what ends up happening, American soldiers don't fight for Israel. Israel doesn't want American soldiers fighting. But as Israel carries out its war in Gaza, Hezbollah's role in this is to distract Israel by forcing soldiers to attack and react to Hezbollah soldiers in up north by the Golan Heights and by the border of Lebanon. Now, if American soldiers are there, American soldiers can distract Hezbollah soldiers by attacking the Hezbollah soldiers. So what ends up happening is that Israel then will be attacked less because American soldiers will be in the region. So American soldiers moving from Iraq upwards towards Syria to engage with Hezbollah, which is in Syria and in Lebanon. So that's a very good development. Okay, then we have going forward, Iran is trying to take over. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say take over. They've already taken over South Lebanon, but through Hezbollah trying to set themselves up to conduct attacks against Israel. But as they keep moving soldiers into the region, today is the Hula region, up north of Israel in South Lebanon. Right, North Israel is South Lebanon. Okay, so Israel attacked Hezbollah soldiers getting set up to attack Israel and wipe a lot of those soldiers out. We had U.S. drones. Okay, going back to America, U.S. drones U.S. ships have stopped to date 15 drones and 4 missile attacks against Israel. So those American ships that are in the Mediterranean, that are in the Red Sea, what they are doing, which is an incredible thing, is they are stopping attacks against Israel. The United Nations has finally, it's absolutely mind-boggling that the United Nations hasn't done this to date, but the United Nations until today has refused to investigate the rape claims that Israelis made against Palestinian terrorists in the October 7th and ensuing attacks after that. We have documented cases of rape. There are evidence of rape, and the United Nations' role, especially the Human Rights Council, is to then investigate these allegations of rape, which they haven't done. And when challenged why they haven't, they go into all these political. It's very simple. The United Nations' role is to ensure that women around the world don't get raped as an act of war. Women were raped by Hamas and Palestinian terrorists and Palestinian civilians during the October 7th attacks. This is always I should say it's a consistent pattern of hypocrisy that we see, that when others face attacks of, let's say, sexual abuse or of that nature in the midst of a war, the UN is always there to investigate. But when it comes to Israel, it's not. Now, it's very easy to call out this hypocrisy, but it's really just something that we're so used to. There's almost no point in continuously calling out the hypocrisy. So I tend not to do it. Here, what we're seeing is, for the first time, the UN has been called on their hypocrisy so much that the United Nations Secretary General has said, these things should really be investigated. That doesn't mean that they will be investigated. It just means that the leader of the United Nations, the one that's elected and appointed by other countries to lead the United Nations, said that it should happen. Whether countries decide in the United Nations Human Rights Council to investigate these allegations is that we'll have to see. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm telling you, I'm not joking, if I'm not mistaken, the leader of the leading country in the United Nations Human Rights Council today is Iran. Yes, so you can see why allegations against Hamas were not investigated by the United Nations Human Rights Council if it's led by Iran. You can't make this stuff up. There's a plan that's being reported to end the war earlier by having the United States play a role, along with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, in expelling lower-level Hamas members from the Gaza Strip. They didn't say where they would go, but expelling them from the Gaza Strip, which will then enable the war to end earlier because there'll be no Hamas people left in the Gaza Strip. And then having Saudi Arabia and the UAE create zones in Gaza that are Hamas-free zones that they would then sponsor. This seems like a Hail Mary type of imaginary, fantastical plan. It's based off the fact that in another time period in history with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was a terrorist group, they did agree to some sort of a deal which allowed the expulsion of members of Hamas of the PLO from Lebanon to Tunis and in Algeria. But here it's a totally different story. Hamas is an ideological group. The PLO is more of a practical group, so they agreed to it. Hamas will probably fight till the very end and not agree to any of these deals. On to bad news. Unfortunately, in Yerushalayim this morning, in the entrance to the city of Yerushalayim, coming from the highway that connects Yerushalayim into Tel Aviv, there was a terrorist attack. This is Palestinians that used to be or still are members of Hamas. Unclear whether Hamas was the one that ordered the attack or these people are just these three terrorist Palestinians who live in Jerusalem or used to live until we eliminated them this morning by killing them, whether they were sent by Hamas or not. But they killed 3 people and injured 6 people. I just want to point something out here. Because it's important. A lot of times when we look at a terrorist attack, we judge the terrorist attack in the headlines by the amount of people killed and the amount of people injured. So if nobody's injured, it looks like the attack was basically nothing. As a family of terror victims, I can tell you that the physical injuries are horrific. And obviously, if somebody dies and is killed, that's even more horrific. But the true nature of a terror attack isn't meant to kill people and isn't meant to injure people. The terror attack is designed to terrorize the population in general. And the way that works is people that live near there or people that were eyewitnesses to the terror attack or were involved in the terror attack, but they just weren't injured. In other words, the person next to them was shot, but nothing happened to them. That person will be traumatized, and listen to me carefully when I say this, for the rest of their life. For the rest of their life, loud sounds, sirens, fireworks, any of those type of things can traumatize the victim, and in many cases, traumatize them to such an extent that they cannot lead normal lives. That's the problem with terrorism. Terrorism is not about physical injury. It's not about how many people died. It's about the terror that strikes. And it's not a terror that you can just say to somebody, get past it. We're stronger. We're going to move forward. No, to the individual victims. And Israel has, listen to me carefully, hundreds of thousands of victims of terror. These are people that don't show up in the headlines. These are people that could be waiting at a bus stop and a Palestinian terrorist comes by with a knife and runs after them and nobody gets injured. Those are still terror victims. They're not going to be counted in the media. They're not going to be counted in any official statistic. There won't be in the end of the year when the terrorist statistics are compiled and how many attacks were there, how many victims were there. There will be hundreds of thousands of people left off the rolls, but they will be terrorized. That's the trauma of terrorism. The Prime Minister of Israel called in he had the Foreign Minister call in the Spanish ambassador to Israel to reprimand Spain for its prime minister's remarks that Israel is probably violating international law in its attack in Gaza. This is a false claim. Israel has not violated any international laws. No, Israel is conducting a harsh war against Hamas, and yes, civilians have been killed as in any other war, but Israel has not violated any international laws. When the Prime Minister of Spain makes that accusation, he's being reckless and irresponsible. Next week, Prime Minister Netanyahu's trial for corruption resumes, something that we haven't thought about for months. if not a year. But his trial will begin and resume next week. Secretary Blinken from the Secretary of State of the United States is visiting now and talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu about the war. The war will resume after the ceasefire, and Israel will have to attack south of Gaza in order to the southern part of Gaza in order to make sure that they can go ahead and wipe out Hamas. In order to do this, they're going to obviously have to add collateral damage where civilians will be injured. Secretary Blinken is asking Israel to do whatever it can to minimize those civilian deaths. It's something that Israel always does anyway. The timing of his visit and the warning that he's giving about civilian deaths causes me and many others to worry about how strong America's support of Israel's war will be going forward. Until this point, it has been rock solid, and all Israelis owe a debt of gratitude and thanks to President Biden for his incredible support of Israel's war effort. We need that to continue. And American Jews have to press their elected officials to press the Secretary of State to make sure that Israel's not held back from finishing the job and finishing off Hamas. The one last piece of bad news before we get on to the questions, the Bibi's family, which is a family in Israel that was taken, all of them were kidnapped. This is two parents, a 4-year-old and a 10-month-old. At first, Hamas claimed that they had given them to a different terrorist group, and then they claimed that they were killed in an Israeli bombing. They have not been freed. Their bodies have not been given in. This speaks to a scary type of realization, which we've sort of always had, which states that it could be that Hamas doesn't have control over all of the hostages. If that is true, which it seems like it definitely does in this case, we're not sure how we're going to get back all the hostages if we can't find them and we don't know where they are. So that is a concern. Okay, let's get to your questions. First question is, can you explain why some of the prisoners in this conflict don't want to be released? And how does the system of paying prisoners affect the situation? So I explained in the video yesterday that some of the terrorists that are being released from Israeli jails don't want to be released either because they want a trial. They've been arrested but haven't been put on trial yet, and they want to be put on trial, or because they get paid for being in jail by the Palestinian Authority, which has a fund which pays terrorists money for their terror attacks, but only if they're in jail. So if they're free, they lose that money. How is Israel helping the hostages that come back into society? It's a very good question. Israel gets them free therapy and obviously physical medical care, and you know, so some of them are they're gonna be in treatment for the rest of their lives, as we said before. Is the Mossad interviewing the hostages when they come back from Israel to get information about Hamas? Yes, the Mossad does interview the hostages when they come back, either the Mossad or the Shin Bet. I won't forget that when my daughter was in a terror attack, we were sitting in the hospital waiting for treatment, and a man came over just wearing jeans and a flannel shirt and started asking my daughter's questions. And I stopped him and I said, "Excuse me, who are you? Why are you here?" And he pulled out an ID card that showed that he was a member of the Shin Bet. And my daughter was actually able to give him information that he didn't know. It was a pretty amazing part of watching the process. But why do you think it took Netanyahu so long to meet with the victims in the kibbutzim? What or who do you think persuaded him into meeting with them? It's a very good question. I don't like getting into the politics in the matter so much, but let's just hope that it was because he was so busy with war preparations. Let's say it that way. Regarding the deal being extended, do you think that the trend will continue and the deal will contour to be extended until, with the help of Hashem, all the hostages returned by the end of this week or next? That would be a wonderful situation if we could keep the ceasefire going until we get all the hostages back. When I go to work, so I have to walk through a mall to get to my office. The buildings are built in such a way that we park in the mall, walk through the mall, and then get into our office. We leave the mall and then go into our office. Hanging from the ceiling of the mall, like they have like strings across the ceiling above our heads. Our umbrellas are hung on those strings, and each umbrella has a picture of the hostages. Now, it takes a lot to get the umbrellas up. It took them about 10 hours to get all the umbrellas up. And I wish, as the hostages came down, they would be able to take the umbrellas down. The mall isn't taking them down. Well, it would be wonderful to see such a thing where less and less of the umbrellas are put up. Why is Qatar so involved in negotiations and in contact with Hamas frequently? Qatar sponsors Hamas. They're the ones that them and Iran together pay money to Hamas. So that's why they're so involved. Regarding the ceasefire being extended 4 more days, how did Israel overlook Hamas violating it? Did they overlook this for the hostages? And how did Hamas violate it? Yeah, so this is Hamas keeps violating the ceasefire. Today's terror attack was one example, but they violated the ceasefire, and unfortunately, Israel has to make a choice. Do they call out Hamas and say, okay, you violated the ceasefire, we're going back to war now, and then not get the hostages back, or do they say, okay, you know what, we're going to go back to war in any case in 2 days, we'll just wait till then? I guess if Hamas violated in such an egregious way, then Israel would end the ceasefire. But until now, they haven't. Are the 10 terrorist groups inside of Gaza also helping Hamas in the war? Yes or no? Yes. So there are 11 terrorist groups inside of Gaza, operating 11 that we know about, and they are all helping Hamas attack Israel. How would you think that Israel would trade for the 3 soldiers' bodies that Hamas is holding? Well, I would never have known the answer to this, but we found out because they're going to be returning them today. So it was 50 prisoners from Hezbollah and from Hamas, 50 Palestinian terrorists from Israeli jails, and 24 hours more of a ceasefire, and that's what the price was. How does Israel plan to ensure the safety and well-being of the released hostages, considering reports of the maltreatment during captivity? They get medical care and they get mental health care, so that's how Israel does it. Until what point will Israel decide that the number of Palestinian prisoners being released from jail is not worth another exchange of hostages? I don't know if Israel will ever think that way. It seems like they don't. It seems like they keep thinking that the trade-offs are worth it. So, do you think that Israel could do the negotiations with Hamas without the help of the United States? No. Israel doesn't have capabilities of talking directly to Qatar because they don't have diplomatic relations with Qatar, and obviously they're not talking to Hamas. So the United States is the one that's able to put this together. I'm still confused about pay for slay. Why would Palestinians get a salary for being in jail? Well, Palestinians in jail are looked upon as heroes by their people. And if they were conducted an attack on behalf of the Palestinian people, and then the Palestinian people abandoned them, that would look like they're abandoning their heroes, and nobody would tolerate that. Now, unfortunately, they look at terrorists as their heroes. This is the problem. And then when they pay their terrorists, right, for being in jail for the acts that they did, so they don't look abandoned. But that then incentivizes other people that, let's say, can't make a living or want to be heroes to then conduct other terrorist attacks. So that's the problem. In what ways is the Israeli government negotiating for their hostages and prisoners? What is Israel doing for the returned hostages? Does Israel let the public know where the prisoners are released so they are aware of any threat? So the first couple of questions we answered. And the second one, does Israel allow the public to know? It's out there, as Israel releases documents, but you'd have to go and read them in order to keep up with it. Will Israel demand the release of specific hostages if they continue to keep the no fighting agreement? Israel has to okay the list of proposed hostages that are being released. So they have to, Hamas doesn't just get to release any random 10 people that they want. It has to be approved by Israel. Okay, that's the end of our video. If you have any questions, please put them below the comments. Our next video, Bezrat Hashem, hopefully the war will end and then we won't have to make a video. But if the war is continuing and there's a need to make a video, the next one will be in next week. Okay, that's it. Shabbat Shalom. Let's have victory, safety, and security for the people of Israel and our soldiers and hostages brought home safely.